requirements and registration. So things about like requirements, hours, community service, things like that. And those are listed on here. If you're not able to click the link, someone from the team might be able to just put the links in the chat, or there's access to this PowerPoint after, and you should be able to click the links there. They're going to be like live links. So that's that, and we'll move along. So overview, application cycle. This is kind of just going to be like big picture, when stuff happens during the cycle. So first thing, this is, and these are just kind of like general guidelines. It's not like there's not like one way to do it. So the MCAT, like the green arrow or the green little star is kind of where we're at right now. So most people during this time of the application would be taking their MCAT if they had not already taken it. And then in end of May, early June, the primary application opens. And so that's when you'll be able to submit the application that we're going to be talking about today. And that'll get sent to all the schools initially before you get a secondary back. And then the secondary apps usually start rolling in around July and come in, honestly, as late as next year, the following year. And then you'll have to look specifically for the schools that you're applying to, but certain schools, they have like judgment tests that they require. So like Casper's one of them. I think the AAMC also has like a situational judgment test that they have. And that's going to differ school to school. I would say majority of schools don't have this, but at least when I applied, I did, I think, for one or two schools, but that's just something to keep in mind, to make sure you're like getting your application in and not having any delay to it. And then interviews kind of start happening around August, after you submit your secondary. So most times interviews won't get, you won't get offered an interview, or your application won't even actually get like looked at until like the complete application is in. So that's including like your primary application, your MCAT scores, your secondary apps, sometimes a judgment test. But so you want to try to get like your complete application in, because that's when the admissions committees will start to actually read it and like go through your application. And then that's when you'll start getting interviews. So general rule of thumb, people say, is like, if you get a secondary, try to get it back within like 2 to 3 weeks, just so you're kind of having a quick turnaround and you're not delaying any possible interviews. So yeah, that happens from August on. Again, this is like variable. For CU, I actually didn't get my interview until like end of January or February, or early February. So it definitely can go into the next year. Just because you don't get something by November, December, and it doesn't mean like it's the end. And these are kind of more exact dates for this current application cycle. So if you were to apply this upcoming cycle that opens in June, May, you would start school fall of 2024. So the application opens on May 2nd, and then you can actually submit the application on May 30th. And then as you can see here, like there's some delay in when you submit an application and when the AAMC will actually send that application to the schools. And so even if you send it like the very first day it opens, May 30th, no medical school is going to see your application earliest until June 30th. And so that's something to keep in mind. Just like if you submit it and you don't hear anything back, it's not the end of the world. If it's before June 30th, like the med schools hadn't even received it yet. And then as far as the AMCAS application opening May 2nd, it's really helpful to like go in there and get familiar with it. Start to enter in a lot of the like non-personal statement or like activity information. So like just your general like demographics and your transcripts. You have to enter in each like grade and like course title and all of that like manually one by one. And so it can take a while. So it's just better to kind of do that in the beginning and get that out of the way. And then as far as specifically for CU School of Medicine, so these are kind of like the more specific dates for us. As you can see, the earliest that you can submit a supplemental application is July 10th. So on that June 30th, if CU gets it and then they send one out, the earliest that they'll send it out and that they can receive it would be July 10th. And yeah, and then these are just also some general deadlines: October 15th and November 30th. These are the primary and secondary application deadlines. Just a rule of thumb, not even specifically with Colorado School of Medicine, but you don't want to wait until the deadlines. Plenty of people will probably tell you that like the earlier you get your application in, the better it is overall, like for chances of admission or interviews, just because once you delay submitting it, you're like now in like a large pool of applications that have to get processed by the AAMC before they even get sent over to the school. So just general rule of thumb, it's generally good to submit the applications earlier rather than later. And so this is kind of a general outline of what is in the primary application. And so, like I was saying earlier, there's the general background information, just like where you grew up, home address, all that stuff. And then coursework and official transcripts. So even though you're going to send your transcripts, your official transcripts to like the schools that you are applying to or that you get into, you still have to submit these in like enter them in manually. And so, like I said, it's kind of tedious. It's not hard, but it can take a while, especially if you have like, multiple degrees or like if you did post-bac, then you'll have to enter those as well. And then your MCAT score is something that you will enter onto the application as well. Your letter of evaluations, you will enter in as well, your personal statement, your work and activities, and then you're also going to submit or select what schools you want to submit this application to. And so it's kind of just like you check off the ones, or you search and enter the schools that you want. And then when you actually are ready to submit your application, the application automatically gets sent to all of the schools. Just like, and also a note on letters of evaluation, you can store up to 10, like you can have up to 10 letters submitted to your application. And then when it comes time to sending them and assigning them to the schools, you have like the ability to choose which letters are going to which schools. So general tip, I guess, that I got was just like get as many letters as you can, and then you have the decision to like what letters you actually want to use and which ones you want to assign to the schools you're going to go to or apply to. So little note on letters of rec. In terms of applying to med school is just as pricey, well, not just as pricey, but it's pricey. And so as you can see here, primary application, it's $170 for the first school, and then it's $43 for every additional school that you apply to after that. And there's people, who apply to 10 or 11, and there's people who apply to like 30 plus. I think the average is somewhere around 20, but even that would add up. And then again, once you get your secondary application back to submit those, it's another $50 to $150. And that's in addition to the primary application fees that you just paid for. So you can see how it would very quickly add up in terms of the cost that it required, that it would require to submit these applications. Interview travel, that is it varies, obviously, just because like if you're traveling for in-state versus out-of-state versus, can you drive there? Can you have to fly there? How long are you going to be staying there? Is your room and board? All that stuff. But I would say the other factor is just, especially in light of COVID, some schools have like virtual interviews still. They've stuck with it so far. Whereas a few schools, I think, have gone back to in person. I think that's definitely the minority, but that's still something to consider. And so, yeah, just kind of rough estimate totals, expect to spend a few $1,000s on just the application alone. And with that being said, the biggest thing I would say, if you qualify for it, is to apply for the AAMC fee assistant program. And so this one, they give you, as listed here, they give you MCAT prep materials. They'll cover the MCAT fee, the AMCAS fee, and the secondary application fees. Something specific for the secondary application fees is so the primary application fee, that's done through the AAMC, so they have like the power to waive it. But the secondary application fees, that's actually varies school by school. And I think a majority of schools, if you got the fee waiver, they'll waive their secondary fee. But there was one or two schools, because I applied and got the fee assistance program, and there was one or two schools where I still had to actually pay the secondary application fee, even though most of the other schools had waived it. So that's just something to keep in mind, but still drastically reduce the amount of money you're expected to pay. And that's a really great resource. So I would look into it, and honestly, just like apply, even if you don't think you would make it. Wouldn't hurt. And if you do qualify, then it's going to save you like literally thousands of dollars. And so we're going to go a little bit more into the sections for these. So the first one that we'll start off with is just the background info. And so this is just like very general information. You're going to enter like your name, your birth, your sex, and then ID numbers for the schools that you apply to, just so when you start sending in the transcripts, they can like match those up. And then you have to enter your high school, and then you'll enter your whatever like higher education post-secondary institutions you went to. And so this is a really important thing, especially in terms of getting your transcripts in like a timely manner. You have to submit the transcript and like document every school that you went to, that you like took a course and you got a grade for. Even if you were like say here, even if there's no credits given, if you attended it, you still have to submit it. And so like even if you took like one community college, like one summer community college, you went to another summer, like everywhere that you attended, just start tracking down those transcripts and order those, just because like there can be delays, and it could take some time for you to get it if it's the mail or if it's virtual. So I would just say start on that earlier. And then again, just some basic like biographic information. You'll put some contact info, some like demographic stuff about your ethnicity, races, family information. So for the transcripts and the courseworks, so once you submit it, you're going to get your overall GPA, which is just like everything. And then they'll calculate a science GPA. And so as you can see here, they categorize science as like biology, chemistry, physics, and math. And then everything else is just they give you like a third GPA, and it's like all other. And so those are like the three that you'll get, but the most important, I would say, are your overall and your science. And then as far as, I think this part was a little tricky for me personally, just because there's some stuff that like felt like it could be science, but like it doesn't necessarily fall into one of these four like broad categories. And so you can submit it how you think it would be categorized, and then like part of the verification process is them going through your transcript and verifying it. And if it's not one of the science courses, then it doesn't get calculated as it, but you can like note it that you think it does. And so that's kind of like nitty gritty, but I would say, and there's like a whole list on the AAMC somewhere where it gives you like a more detailed, like not just these big categories, but like a more detailed breakdown of what would qualify for these courses. So if you're confused, that would be a good resource to look at. And then kind of just said here, like the official transcripts take a little while to get to and processed by the AAMC. So like, again, it doesn't hurt you to get it in early. It's only gonna like take stress off you, because you'll kind of have that out of the way. And then when you're applying to schools, a really important thing to do is to check that you even meet the school's requirements, just because it's a requirement, and usually they don't let those slide. And that's kind of like they're already looking for reasons to like throw you in the like not interview pile. And so like it's kind of it would be a waste of your time if you like didn't take the right courses or enough of the courses. I know when I was applying to a couple of med schools, I didn't take any like intro to psychology courses in undergrad, and some of them had like a strict requirement for like psychology or sociology courses. And so right off the bat, I took those off my list. And then again, it can take up to 6 to 8 weeks for your application to get processed once it's submitted. And so it is a little bit of a waiting game, which is honestly kind of like the worst part, because you're already on edge and you have to wait quite a long time. So the first big part of the primary application is going to be your personal statement. And so for this one, it's a very, very vague, kind of broad prompt, and use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. With the exception being if you're applying to an MD PhD program, you'll have two more essays regarding like the research aspect of the MD PhD program. And so that's something to consider. Obviously, I think it goes without saying that you really want to like spell check and have multiple people read over this, make sure everything sounds good, read it out loud, just because, you know, it would not look good to submit an essay with a lot of typos in it. So, yeah, so the next kind of advice is kind of what is considered when writing these personal statements. And so this is just like a very like basic kind of intro, like why have you selected the field of medicine? What motivates you to go into medicine? What do you want to talk about in this part that like didn't get like that you didn't have a chance to talk about earlier in the application? And then the last two are kind of like if you have unique hardships, challenges, obstacles that may have influenced your educational pursuits. Or you can use part of the personal statement to talk about like if you had a very clear like drop or there was like a brief bad trend in like grades or something happened that like you weren't able to explain somewhere else. That's something that you also could talk about in the personal statement. So those are kind of like the big starting points. And then I would honestly personally say that this was the most overwhelming part of the application for me, just because it's like a really big part of it and there's so many different avenues you could take. And so just like this tip said, I didn't start with like an intro because I was like, okay, I don't really know what I'm going to start with. So like, let me just like think about like experiences that I've had and how I can like relate that to how I want to go into like how those experiences shaped me into wanting to go into medicine. And you're gonna maybe write a draft and it's going to be what you think is good, and then you're gonna give it to somebody and they're like, this is terrible. Like, don't be afraid to like kind of start from the beginning. I wrote a personal statement, and then like the second or third draft, I wrote like a completely different personal statement, and that's the one that I ended up going with. So you want to ultimately write like the best personal statement, and even if you put a lot of work into the first one, if you think that you have like a better story or a stronger story, don't be afraid to like change it up. And then this probably goes without saying, but like part of your personal statement should probably touch on the fact of like why you want to be a doctor, and not just like I want to be a doctor to help people, but a little bit more like of a meaty response, or like a deeper response. And so a lot of people usually talk about experiences that they've had, usually maybe adjacent to healthcare, but there are some that I've read when I was applying that like weren't really related to healthcare at all, and they were still really good personal statements. If they touch on like the qualities or aspects of healthcare that you learned in these experiences, they could also be a personal statement that is worth writing. And then I think probably a lot of people have a difficult time with the whole like showing and not telling. So you don't just want to be like, I did this experience and it made me want to do medicine, but like showing how that experience changed you, how it altered your like perspective on medicine, what you hope to do in medicine, things like that. And starting early would probably be a really big tip that I would give. Again, you're probably going to go through multiple drafts of your personal statement. You're going to send it to people and get feedback on it. In terms of sending it to people, I would say like it's great to send it to people. I would say send it to people who know you well, just to see if like what you wrote on paper is like true to who you are, because that's ultimately what's going to like catch the eye of somebody who's reading it. And so, yeah, I would say, professors who know you well, or friends, or an advisor of some sort, a mentor. Those would all be great people who could critique or give you comments on your personal statement. And then another thing, the AAMC lists like core competencies for like a good or like an incoming medical student. And so it might be a good idea to take a look at that and kind of see what they're looking for in future physicians, and trying to see how you can tell an experience that like displays and shows that you have those attributes. And so kind of what I touched on earlier, you want to answer the why and the how and not just like what. So like, don't just talk about like when you went to a summer abroad and did this thing, like you can talk about that, but like you want to ultimately talk about like how that changed you, what it like showed you, how it did it, motivate you to want to do medicine. Listed here, like don't just say like I did these things so I want to be a doctor and now I want to be a doctor because I did all these things. It's kind of just like a cycle that doesn't really tell the reader anything. And so the biggest thing is like when somebody's done reading your personal statement, they just want to know like, wow, like I really truly believe that this person wants to go into medicine, and I got that from reading their personal statement. And another thing is that the personal statement there's obviously a character limit to it. And so you want to be like concise with what you're saying. Which is obviously a hard thing to do when you're trying to like show and be descriptive, but not like overly descriptive that you're like wasting, you're wasting the character limit, and you don't really get to like say what you want to say. And then kind of just like a thing here is a red flag thing that maybe you would want to avoid is like saying that you were practicing medicine to some degree and like you went to a summer abroad in other countries and you did surgery with the doctors there. Like that is a little bit of a red flag. So you can still talk about that experience, but like maybe don't get into the nitty gritties of of things that you were doing that maybe you shouldn't have been doing. And so I think like the biggest trap or thing that students get caught in is the whole like I want to help people, and it's like that's great, but so do nurses and so do physical therapists and all these things. So like just saying like I want to help people and that's why I want to be a doctor is like not a good enough response. And so you really want to make sure that you're specifically saying like why you want to do medicine and like why being a doctor specifically is something that you are pursuing. And that's also something you'll be able to bring up and talk about in your interviews. Most interviews that I was in, they did ask like, why a doctor over a PA or something like that. So just good to start thinking about those questions now also. And then kind of what I was saying, like answer the why not another medical profession. They want to see why you want to be a doctor. But don't just be like, I want to be a doctor, not an NP or PA. Like just kind of show in your experiences and what you want, like explain how those things are like very fitting for a doctor, but maybe not a nurse or an NP or PA. And like, don't explicitly say that, but just whether it's like, I really enjoy having like a leadership role or blah, 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 like something that like is very much like in the avenue of a doctor, but not explicitly saying like, this is why. And then another big thing that the personal statement, because it's so broad, it's like your time to do kind of whatever you want to do with it. And so if something wasn't covered early in your application, this is a great place to talk about it. And I would say don't be afraid to get personal. I know like if you go down the Reddit or like Student Doctor Network channels, people will say like, don't talk about sentimental things, like don't talk about emotional things or things that are like might show them that you're not cut out for it. Like I would say like to a certain extent, but like don't be afraid to get vulnerable and like show a weakness of some sort that you might have had throughout your life or a challenge that was really like difficult to overcome. As long as you can show that like you've overcome it and it's like made you a better person, or it's like shaped your perspective and helped you like push you towards your career in medicine, like all of this, it can't just be like a sob story or like I had a hard life. It needs to be like, okay, that plus like, and this is why I'm ready for medicine, or like, and this is what it's taught me to like carry forward. And then this probably goes without saying, but like don't type it into GPT. It's not going to be very personal if you don't. And so, yeah, personal statement, big picture, be honest. The big thing that I would say is like your experience is unique. Even if somebody had like the exact same activities or whatever, what you got out of it is still unique. And so like make sure to just talk about your personal experience. And as long as you truly believe what you're writing, like that's going to come across. And it's going to be something that is really going to catch the attention of the reader. And then again, don't just say like you want to help people. And then also like specifically, why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to be a physician? Yeah. And then editing wise, we already touched on this, but start early. You're going to want people to review it. Again, the type of people that you want to review should be people who kind of know you well. Again, another point on here is that like critiques or comments or, you know, suggestions for your personal statement are great. But don't let it like completely override what you want to talk about and what you're passionate about. You should kind of use the comments and the edits to like guide you to your point, but like don't let other people's comments like completely throw your story off or like make you change it completely. Like if you really believe that it's your story and it's a good one, you know, just figure out how you can make it a better story, but you don't necessarily have to change it. And again, you can take it to like writing centers, pre-med advisors, talking to current medical students is always a good job, just because, you know, they did it at one point and it was obviously good enough to get them in. And then if you are going to give it to people, make sure you kind of have like a rough timeline. You don't want to like send it to somebody and then have them give it to you like 2 months later when you could have had like several drafts done in that time. And then something that they talk about here is making different versions. But I personally just kind of stuck with the one idea that I had and kind of just like built and like, you know, added, took away. But ultimately I still stayed with like the core story. So I didn't have like multiple versions of that. But yeah, so the next portion is work and activities. And I think we're going to have someone else hop on for this section. And they'll kind of run down through the next portion of the presentation.
Yeah, all right. I can start that. I think
I'm gonna stop sharing the screen.
perfect. Share this. Great. Can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey y'all. So I'm Austin. I'm also a first year, so I'll be taking over from this part onward. So the work and activity session is another also pretty complicated and pretty personal part of your application as well. This and your personal statement are really your two biggest opportunities to kind of show the admissions committee what kind of person you are and you know what you're like outside of medicine and why you want to be a physician and just who you are as a person. So you have, for the work and activity section, you have up to 15 spots for you to write about work and activities. And you have a 700 character limit in each of those spots to write about whatever you choose. And of those 15, you also have 3 that you can choose to designate as your most meaningful experience. And we'll go over that later, but you have a little bit more space to write about why those were meaningful to you, how those shaped you, what you learned, or how you grew from it. I'll also note that even though you have 15 spots to write about work and activities, you don't have to fill up all 15. That's just a maximum. You don't have to write out every single small little detail. And you also don't have to like go out and look for 15 different things. You also don't have to go out to look for like 15 different things that can fill up your space. Again, that 15 is just there as a maximum. Do what is relevant and important to you. Don't think you need to check boxes to fill up all those spots. So included in those working activities are, you have to include the date, the title, and the organization name, pretty standard stuff. Dates include like when you started, it's usually like month and then year up to when it ended, or if it's still ongoing, I think you would put your projected end date. If it's sometime in the future, after you submit your application. You will also give a rough estimate of how long you spent on your work/activity, and this is just, you know, so that they can check, they can kind of see, oh, did you just like do like 20 hours of community service and just moved on. So you'll give a rough estimate for that. And in that character limit, you'll talk about the responsibilities and accomplishment, things you did, and the impact that you had and that activity might have had on you, as well as some qualities you gained or demonstrated while you were performing this activity. So a tip that the AMC gives is to look back to your activities journal. And this is something that is stressed a lot when you started your pre-med journey, it's highly recommended that you have an activities journal of some kind, where you write about experiences that you've had at different places, how it's impacted you, any kind of reflection you've had. This is helpful for both your personal statement and your working activities, so you can just look back on it and write about it and not have to dredge up stuff that maybe you did 2 or 3 years ago that you thought was meaningful, but you have to like spend time trying to remember details, or you might have forgotten some important reflection that you had had at the time. So if you haven't started an activity journal, try and start one. Doesn't really matter where you're at. It doesn't hurt to just start it at any point in your pre-med journey. And so the categories for your working activities, they're really broad. So you can kind of see on here, it can be artistic endeavors, community service, and it's important that that you see that the AAMC kind of splits up community service into medical community service as well as non-medical community service. So it's kind of important to have both. You know, you can volunteer at a hospital, you can volunteer at a free clinic or something like that, or volunteer at a doctor's office or whatever, and that will count as clinical community service, which is still really important. But they also want to see that you do community service outside of just pure clinical stuff. So kind of make sure you have both. If you have attended any conferences, any extracurricular activities that are important to you, any hobbies, and don't think those are less important. Everything here is equally important. Any honors, awards, recognitions, if you've done intercollegiate athletics, if you've had leadership experience that you haven't talked about anywhere else, like in your personal statement or elsewhere, you can talk about it here. Military service, other, again, super broad, can be anything. Paid employment, and as you can see here, they kind of split up paid employment into non-medical and medical employment. And another important note, physician shadowing. Let me see if I can just do the laser. So physician shadowing is actually its own thing. So this is important when you're trying to get clinical experience. Just keep in mind that you could shadow a physician for a number of hours, but that technically doesn't count as community service in a medical sense. So keep that in mind. Don't put all your eggs in one basket and think that, oh, if I shadow a physician for 4 years and do a bunch of stuff, then that covers both of these categories. Again, if you've had any research presentations or posters, any publications, if you've worked in a lab at any point or had any kind of research experience, and then, you know, if you've taught, if you have teaching experience, if you have tutored, if you're a TA at any point, these are all things that you can definitely talk about. Nothing's like really too small. If it's meaningful to you, then it is meaningful to you, and it is something that you should definitely talk about, because schools want to get to know who you are as a person. Okay. And this is new for 2023, which I kind of wish I had too, because this is really cool. So you can also write about anticipated experiences. So these are experiences that, these are activities that you haven't started yet, but you kind of have a lock and you know you're going to do them. But they're going to start after you've submitted your application. So it could be an entirely new future experience. So maybe like a planned experience that's a continuation of something you've done in the past, or oh, actually, so in the past, we haven't had something like this. In the past, you would just put like a regular experience, and then you would put start date like in the future, and then a projected end date. And then an important thing to note is that an anticipated activity can't have a date in the past. So the start date must be when you are filling out your application or later, and the latest end date has to be August of the matriculating or following year. So even if you have a plan for like something you want to continue in med school, your end date you have to put for the year that you are theoretically going to be matriculating. So this is just another small category. Again, more things that you can talk about if you have like a volunteering thing lined up, or you have a job lined up, or something like that. So this is an example of what the working activity section kind of looks like on the completed form. It's going to look a little different while you're filling it out. But this is what your admissions committee will see. So they'll see the type of experience. So this goes back to like the categories I talked about. You have to pick what kind of category that your experience falls under, or the best category that it fits under. The name of the experience, and that you just kind of come up with. And then you have to have a contact name for that experience, whether it's a director or if it's an organization, maybe like the current president of that student org. something like that, and their title. And then you have to give, you can choose between either giving them a contact email or contact phone. I think AMCAS doesn't really care which one you give. You can give both, but you just have to have at least one. And then the name of the organization and the location, so the city, state, country. And then over here, if you can kind of see that this is like a description of the experience. So maybe what the organization does, what you did in that organization, and if you're still continuing, and if you have leadership, like in here, you talk about what you did as part of the leadership. So kind of a overview of what the organization does, what you did, and how it impacted you. You don't explicitly have to say like, this will make me a better doctor because I learned blah, 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 blah. But the implication is that you kind of want to write about how this shaped you into becoming a better physician. And so here you can choose whether or not you want this experience to be your most meaningful experience. You include the dates for how long you did this experience, and you estimated the total hours for how long you did this. And then, oh yeah, contact phone here. So if you have a most meaningful experience, I think this is actually pretty good setup. Like the first part, this paragraph here would kind of be what you see for like an experience that isn't your most meaningful experience. And then at the bottom here is your add-on to what to like talk about it a little bit more in depth if this was a most meaningful experience. So this is another one. This is a research/lab. And so, oh, actually, my apologies. That was just the cutoff. So actually, this is what the full most meaningful experience looks like. So you have, again, experience type, experience name, the days that you were in this, the contact title, and phone usually should include name, and then email, and the organization, and the location. And then here you talk about your experience description, and then your most meaningful experience remarks. So I guess a good advice I got was like, kind of in your remarks, you should really talk about the reflection and the most important thing that you learned from it and how it shaped you. And then in the description for the most meaningful experience, you kind of just talk about the objective, like what you did, like in this case, skills you learned, and the impact that you had in terms of like publications, and whether or not you were leadership, and more of like what the organization does. So obviously, if it's not a most meaningful experience, it's kind of compressed, and you kind of have to talk about all that with 700 characters, but you don't have to go as in depth. And here's another example of, in this case, a community service volunteer, specifically a medical clinical. And if you'll notice here, and you can do this for a lot of things that aren't your most meaningful experiences, but you've done a lot of. So for instance, here you can see that they lumped a lot of various different volunteering opportunities into just one entry. So you have like different hospitals and different dates, and how many hours per week. You can also include that information if it's different at different locations, and you have different contact info for each one. So this is also totally viable. I did the same thing too with like paid employment. It wasn't my most meaningful experience, but I still wanted to show that I'd done it and talk about it a little bit. So I included just various different jobs that really weren't interrelated and just lumped it into my into just paid employment, non-medical category. So this is also totally viable. Again, if you don't think that you can write like a lot, like 700 characters for each and every single entry on here, totally fine to just smush it into one entry and just put that under one big lumped category. So the most meaningful experiences, you get 3 of those, and you have a little bit more space in addition to your description of the experience itself. You have a little more space to reflect on it. So in addition to that 700 character space, you also have 1325 more characters to talk about it, which really isn't a lot. So you kind of have to be concise with it. And it's a good idea to have letter writers from these experiences to further show that this was indeed a most meaningful experience, that you connected with higher ups in that, or someone willing to write you a letter of recommendation who can kind of attest to how well you did, or how much of an impact you had, or how much you learned and grew in that experience. And so what do you want to include in that 1325 additional reflections? So you want to talk about everything you wrote about from your other activities, what the organization does, all the objective stuff, and also how you grew from the experience, why it's why it stands out from your other listed experiences. So kind of why this is most meaningful to you. And this is often the activities where you have more to say and you want to like talk about something more because you're so passionate about it. And from an anecdotal experience, you don't have to write about medical stuff as your most meaningful experiences. Again, like I think a lot of pre-meds, I know I had this idea that like, oh, if I'm going to medicine, my most meaningful stuff has to be medicine related. And that's definitely not true. It's meaningful to you, and that's what's most important. So for me, I think I wrote like, I don't think any of my experiences were strictly like clinical. I had one that was like a biotech job that I was working at currently, one that was a hobby, and then one was a college sport that I did. So none of them were actually like medicine related. And if you have stuff that is medicine related, totally fine to do that too. As long as it's the important thing is just it has to be meaningful to you. And it's got to be something that you can write a lot about and show that you learned a lot and it really changed you or it really shaped you. So that's what's more important, not necessarily what type of experience you had. So how to prepare for your working activity section beforehand. And this is obviously stuff that you're going to do like, years. And this isn't stuff that you prepare for like a month before your application. But as hard as it might seem, do what you're passionate about. Like, yes, you have boxes and stuff and things you need to do as a pre-med to get into med school, but you should also do things that you're passionate and things that you enjoy and things that you can talk about in interviews that interviewers will see that you actually care about and can tell that you're passionate about. Shadowing again is probably like the only must-have activity that you have to have on there, just because, along with like probably some form of medical volunteering, clinical experience in general, just because med schools want to know that you've been in the clinical space and seen what it's like and you still want to apply because of that. But outside of that, really do things that you're passionate about, because what will definitely hurt you is if it reads on your application or if an interviewer asks you about something and it just comes off as like, yeah, this is something I did to check a box and then moved on. I didn't really care about it. It just doesn't come off as super strong. It's not really going to help you. So follow your curiosity about things you want to do. That kind of gives you a natural story to tell, and it'll change you for the better. And I can definitely attest to this, that like if you follow your curiosity, again, when you talk about it with an interviewer, it naturally just comes out as a really nice story, and kind of like the personal statement, you want to show, not tell, your journey. And make sure you don't add fluff to your things. Again, this kind of goes back to like, don't add stuff that you did just to like check a box. So again, don't stress about finding things if you don't have 15 activities. That's a max. That's not a requirement. Don't write about activities that you wouldn't be excited to talk about in an interview. So like even with my job, like my jobs that I kind of lumped into one thing, I wasn't like, they weren't most meaningful experiences to me, but if somebody had asked me about them, I would still have like lessons and stuff that I learned from it and that I could still talk about for a little bit. And that wouldn't come off as like, oh, I mean, I just put it just because it needs to go on the application. I have nothing to say about it. So again, don't participate and seek out opportunities just to check a box. For a lot of schools, when they interview, and admissions committees too, they'll have your entire portfolio. Some schools, the interviewers won't have it, but some schools will. And if they have your entire portfolio, it is totally fair game for the interviewers to just like point to a random thing and just be like, tell me about this, and if it's something that you're not at all passionate about or something that you hated or something you didn't really care about, then, it's going to come off like that. And the interviewers are pretty good at telling stuff like that. So, yeah, like I said, they'll ask you about experiences that, they might see like, oh, you wrote like one or two sentences about that, so make sure that everything you include, you have a story, you have lessons, you have takeaways from all of that. So what exactly makes a work and activity section good? Like almost every other aspect of the application that we've talked about, starting early is key, just so you can edit stuff. And like I said, the personal statement, obviously you need edits, but even the work and activity section, you should get, if possible, you should get someone to kind of take a look at it and maybe make some edits and maybe see like, oh, did this convey the takeaway that I wanted it to do? Did it come off as one way or another? So this is also something that you can definitely get edited. like the personal statement, you want to write your experience as a story rather than a resume. If they wanted like a CV, they would just ask you to submit a CV of just like a list of everything you've done. You want to talk about this more like a story. So talk about the impact result, qualities you demonstrated, what you learned, how it impacted you, how it changed you. And maybe sometimes this can be a little bit tricky with like later on with secondaries too, but for a meaningful experience, it can be pretty powerful to show, like to talk about a specific experience within that activity that you're talking about, especially if one that had like a lasting impact on you. Sometimes you kind of want to save that for when you're writing secondary and you want to talk about that more in your secondary application and the essays you're sending out to schools. So you kind of have to weigh which one you want to talk about that more, but it is totally an option to just talk about a meaningful experience. And if you have two meaningful experiences, then go for it. Write one in your work and activity section, and then write one in your secondary section. Your most important thing is you got to convince the reader that you gained something from each experience and that you didn't just like do something, check a box, and then leave without learning anything at all. So example for research is you don't have to spend the whole time talking about your project and like going into like excruciating detail, you know. Kind of give it an overview and then again talk about more of the important things of like what you learned from it, if you demonstrated any qualities and how you learned and grew from it. So again, you can write about really anything you want, but there are some good green flags that like med schools like to see. So activities that you have been engaged in for a long time, they're good for most meaningful experiences. Like for me, I've been doing music since like elementary school. So I wrote about that and like my hours for that were just insane because I've been doing that for a really long time. And it's also had a huge impact on who I am as a person. So that was definitely a most meaningful experience for me. So something that you've engaged in for a long time will also come off as more convincing because if you like started something like a month ago and you've sunk like 30 hours into it and you're like, oh, this is my most meaningful experience. Oftentimes the admissions committee is just going to look at it and be like, is it really? Or are you just saying that it is because you think we want to hear that? And another good thing, because again, you want to stand out is activities that aren't likely to be in anyone else's application. So hobbies that are meaningful to you, that is totally fine to write about. And if you feel like it's something that's super unique, definitely write about it. Med schools love that stuff. Can tell you a number of stories I had of like someone who wrote a super unique activity or hobby, and then during interviews, like the person just asked like, hey, just tell me about this. I've never heard of this before. So definitely include that. And activities that demonstrate intentional pursuit. So again, with that story of like, I was curious about something and I like followed through with it and here's what I did and here's what I learned and all that, where you can write just a really good story from that. That's also something that can come off as a really good, most meaningful experience. And then again, like with the personal statement, you don't have to use, and like the activity section in general, you don't have to use all of the characters provided. You know, if you can write something in a more concise way, then go ahead and do that. Again, that word character limit is not a requirement. I personally did find it difficult actually to cut it down because I want to talk about things a lot. But if you can concisely convey stuff, that's also kind of a green flag, and it shows that you can, you know, you've thought about it, you've taken the most important bits out of this story, and you can write about that without including a lot of unnecessary fluff. So when you are writing about your work and activities and just you're coming across your application as a general, your entire primary application and secondary application, this is something that you should also think about are like what characteristics you demonstrated, what qualities you demonstrated, or what qualities you learned about during your activities. So if this list seems familiar, this is the AAMC core competencies. We talked about this in our letter of recommendation talk. This is stuff that you should also think about, like your letter recommendation writer should think like what qualities you presented when they're writing about it. But kind of in that similar vein, you also want to think about what qualities you've exhibited in your work and activities or just during your personal statement or your secondary or any part of your application. It's important to kind of go through all this, and I think you can pretty easily find this on the AAMC's website, or just anywhere. If you just Google like AAMC core competencies, just kind of go through this list, see what see what qualities you exhibited, and if you can emphasize that during your work and activity section, personal statement, secondaries, then go ahead and do that. You don't have to specifically be like, I demonstrated quantitative reasoning when I did blah blah blah, but like talk about something like that, or I demonstrated critical thinking, like just it's implied. And if you'll notice, there's literally only two competencies, right? Everything else is about like non-science related competencies, who you are as a person. So this kind of goes to show you that, like, yeah, it's important to be good at science and everything. You got to talk about other stuff like social skills and emotional skills. Okay. So this is kind of a specific section for Texas medical schools. They have their own application season and their own application website. They don't go through AMCAS like the rest of the US or US allopathic schools. So if you're interested in that, this is kind of a brief overview. If you're interested in that, you should definitely like look up TMDSAS yourself, read up on it. They have their own application timelines, and it's similar. So you can kind of, if you're interested in both like Texas medical schools and other schools as well, you can kind of prep for both at the same time. You'll notice that the personal statement is shorter than the AMCAS or AACOMAS, which is the DO school application, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But they also have two additional essays. The second essay is optional. I'm not too familiar with myself. I didn't apply. Maybe someone can talk about it in the chat, or if not, it might be good to just find out resources of if it's like optional as in truly optional, or optional as in like we're saying it's optional, but you should do it. So you also have a chronology of activities, and you can see this is definitely shorter than the AMC one. So you have 300 characters for a regular activity, and then they still have most meaningful experiences, but you only have 500 characters for that. So if you're going to be prepping for both, make sure you give yourself time to edit stuff down. They accept 5-year-old MCATs, or MCATs that are 5 years old from the time you took them. So that's a little bit more generous than the AMC. I think the maximum for most allopathic medical schools is 3 years for your MCAT. So you should check. And they kind of go through a match system, kind of like residency. So the schools and students, they match based on ranking and order of preference from both parties. Again, I'm not too familiar with the system, so if you're more interested on it, would definitely encourage either asking here in the chat if somebody can answer, or just looking up these questions online. And they have a flat fee of $215. Unfortunately, there is no fee waiver for that, but it does cost a little less than the AMCAS application for allopathic schools. Okay, up next is DO schools, which are another medical school that you can pursue. You don't have to get an MD, right? You can also get DOs, a DO degree. So for the 2023, it opened up in May 4th. So this again varies year to year, kind of like the AMCAS. So you should look for, if DO school is something that you're interested in, you should go to just look this website up and check the timeline out for yourself. Again, they have a pretty similar, but also different category, different types of categories. So their personal statement is 5,300 characters, super similar to the AMCAS. The letters of recommendation are going to be submitted to every single school. So that's a little bit different than letters of recommendations for the AMCAS. It's highly recommended that you have a DO letter of recommendation. And I will say for the personal statement, it's not like required, but if you have kind of a wide DO specific slant in your personal statement, that tends to come across a little bit stronger. They just kind of want to know, like, why are you picking the DO degree specifically over an MD degree? And then in influences section, again, you should mention DOs or MDs that influence your commitment to medicine. Obviously, first and foremost, you want to show like your commitment, like why you wanted to choose medicine in general. And then maybe if possible, you can talk about why DO specifically. And then their primary application fee process is kind of similar to ours, where you have one fee for your first program that you apply to, and then additional costs for each school that you apply to. And then there's also a fee waiver available. So just like with the AMCAS, if you can just apply for that fee waiver. If you can't get it, doesn't hurt to just try it anyway. You never know. And the secondary costs, kind of like the AMCAS, again, it varies from school to school. I didn't apply to DO school, so I can't speak to like the average range. But yeah, if it's anything like the MCAS, it'll vary from school to school. Each one will have its own cost. So it's also good to check that out on the school's website if that's something that you're interested in. So as an overall for your primary application, a question that often comes up is like, do you need a cohesive application? And it doesn't have to be cohesive in the sense of like, it doesn't have to be this perfect application of, oh, I did this and that led to this, or I did this. And then like, there's a very strong, like straight and narrow path where I went just like straight down and you can track it super easily. It doesn't have to be cohesive like that. We're all human. We all try different things and we learn and we grow from that. And so oftentimes you have your stories evolve like, oh, I liked this thing, and then I tried something else, and then I learned because of that. I learned because of the random thing that I did. I learned because of this, and that spurred me to go try out this thing. So the more important thing is that like you show intent in the way you pursue things, or even if you can't show like intent, you at least talk about like your motivation for picking things, so that you don't come across as like, I just did this because why not? Because just for the hell of it, or just because I wanted to check a box. It comes across as stronger if you can like talk about, oh, you wanted to learn something, or you had a motivation, you wanted to get better at, you wanted to gain experience in something. And it gives you better takeaways too when you talk about those things in your personal statement or in your work and activities, how that impacted you. If you have a tangible reason of why I wanted to do this thing, and then once I did this thing, here's what I learned from it, it'll come across a lot stronger, and it'll show that you're capable of reflection and critical thinking. Alternatively, you might also have a pattern of experiences that show you're passionate about leadership or something else, and like your experiences all fall into like, I'm passionate about this thing, and so all these experiences kind of like feed into that passion that I really care about. And that goes into like, that's a pretty cohesive application in my mind. And adcoms will definitely pick up on that as like, okay, they were doing all these different things with intent, and I can see why they wanted to do them, how they learned from them. But again, it's also totally okay if you don't have something like that, if you don't have a defining characteristic of like, I really want to work with underserved population, or I really want to work with like the homeless population. I did all that stuff. If you don't have something like that, totally okay as well. Again, like undergrad and pre-med is kind of like your time to learn and grow and try different things and like take those lessons with you in a medical school. So as long as you can show that you got important lessons and learned and reflected on them, that's the more important thing. And it's good to show that you're a well-rounded person, right? Like, if you have like zero hobbies and your literally entire application is just like, I did clinical stuff for my entire undergrad experience, and I did nothing but clinical stuff, no hobbies whatsoever, like, that doesn't necessarily make you a stronger applicant. If you can show you're a well-rounded person and that you have interests outside of medicine, that actually can come off pretty well too. And so before we get into like, when do I reply? Let me show you guys just what a full completed application looks like. Can you guys see can you guys see the application here?
No, we can just see the PowerPoint still.
Okay, hang on, let me share. Hold on, let me try again. Great. Can you guys see it now? You should be able to.
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. Thanks. All right. So this is my application stuff. I'm gonna scroll a little fast so you guys don't have to look at like individual details. But this is kind of what the AdCom will see after you've submitted your application. And you can also download it for yourself. You'll probably need it if you want to like send it to your letter of recommendation writer. So you've got your name, your date of birth, where you live, preferred contact info, biographical information. So like all that general stuff that you've probably done for a lot of different applications all the time. If you have like GI Bill eligibility, something like that, if you have dependents, if you're married, all that good demographic stuff. Language information, if you have like, if you're bilingual, go ahead and write that in. There's not like a lot of space to really talk about that. Your childhood information, so like what your household income might have been. So they ask about like socioeconomic status, and they'll include that here if you're like disadvantaged or if you're first generation. to attend college, I think, any siblings, your additional application information. So have previous matriculation is like, have you been accepted to medical school before? And then they kind of want to know why you're reapplying again, if that's the case, if you've had institutional action. So that's like academic violations, stuff like that, something that like the school got involved. If you have a felony, misdemeanor, U.S. military discharge, so that stuff is stuff they'll ask about. That kind of goes under all that biographic information. And then this is your academic record. And so you kind of talked about that, but the academic record is like, it's not a very intuitive website, and it's not a very great system in terms of like how you fill it out. It's very time consuming. So I would recommend getting a head start on that because there's a time where the application opens versus when you can actually submit stuff versus when it actually gets sent out to school. So when it opens, I'd recommend just start filling this stuff out. This is just stuff pulled straight from your transcript, like your grades, all that good stuff, all your grades. You have to list like all your courses, and there's no way of like pulling it straight from your there's no way of pulling it from your transcript. You have to like manually input it, and then they verify with the transcript. So it's very time consuming. When you can start, just go ahead and do that. There's no brain power involved in that. You literally just fill stuff out. It's good to like just get a head start while you're working on your primary, while you're working on your personal statement or you're working activities. And then you'll talk about your high school, when you graduated, if you took any post-secondary education, and then your school. So where you went for undergrad, if you had any post-bac stuff, you would also include it here, and you'd also include the post-bac like courses in your course list. Here's your GPA where you just scroll past that. Your GPA where they include all of that. Like you said, there's your science, your all other GPA, and then your total GPA. And then you also include your MCAT score if you took it multiple times, what your MCAT score was like. It'll reflect the number of times you took your MCAT, which was a whole other talk that we also had. You should check that out if you had questions, or just ask them here. And then here is your work and activity section. So this is kind of what it looks like. Again, we've showed examples of it, but you talk about kind of like your medical clinical, you follow the experience type, what the name was, what you did, and then you kind of talked about, like in this case, I talked about what my responsibility was and what I did, and what I learned from it. And then your most meaningful experience, again, you have, in this case, I talk about like what my company does, what I did on the company, and then what I learned and why I like chose to do this job and what I learned from it and how it impacted me, and what I'll take from it going into medicine. So again, a little bit more space to talk about it for your most meaningful experiences. And then for honors, awards, recognitions, I just put like all my honors and stuff into just one category because I was not going to talk about each and every single one of those awards in like a separate section. There was not enough stuff. As you can see, I literally wrote like 2 sentences. Community service, again, physician shadowing. I didn't put that as my most meaningful experience. Again, that's totally fine if you didn't. Like, it was a meaningful experience to me, but it wasn't my most meaningful experience, which is totally fine. So you write about, like in this case, what I did, what I learned, and what you'll take with you going into medical school and going into practice in the future. So again, more stuff, research, leadership not listed elsewhere. And then I talked about Dragon Boat, which I did in college for 4 years. And this is like, again, experience description and what I learned from it. And more clinical volunteers. So for me, if you notice, I kind of split up my medical clinical experience into 2 separate categories. You can combine them, you can split them. If you think you can talk about them more as 2 separate entries, that's again totally fine. You have 15 choices. It's really your choice on like what you want to talk about, how much you want to devote to it. You can see here, like my paid employment, I kind of included just 2 random things. No, I guess not random, but I included 2 like very unrelated employment jobs into one thing. And then for, like I said, you can write about anything for your most meaningful experience. So I wrote about percussion, which is just like a hobby. I didn't have like an organization name or anything, but like you can just write about anything as long as it's more meaningful to you. I've been doing that since like elementary school. So I like learned a lot, have a lot of lessons, and like could gain a lot from it. So as you can kind of see, like I wrote for my most meaningful experiences, I had a non-medical related job, college athletics, and then a hobby. So like you can write about anything you want for your most meaningful experiences. The important thing is like write about it well and reflect on it well. So after that, you have your personal statement, which kind of just looks like this. It's a little like underwhelming when you see it after you've spent the better part of like 5 or 6 months or however long you spend on it, just like agonizing over and writing it. There's just your personal statement. And then you have, they can see your letter of recommendations. And like, I don't think they see like which schools got sent, like which letters of recommendation. The school will just like get the letter of recommendation that you give to them. And then here is just like all the schools I applied to. And like, as you can see, I didn't send all my letters of recommendation to all my schools. You can pick and choose, which was something we brought up at the previous talk. And that's kind of about it for just a completed primary application. If like anyone wanted me to go back to the section just to see something, you can type here and then maybe someone can relay it to me while I'm presenting all this. If not, I can also just go back to the presentation. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about this in a little bit previously, but when you need to apply, so as a general rule of thumb, it's good to submit your AMCAS application basically as soon as it's available. In this case, it's May 30th, so like submit it on the dot on May 30th. I will say though, if you believe that like delaying the application a little bit and sending in a little bit late can make your application like a lot stronger, go ahead and do that. It's not the end of the world if you're like a little bit late. Like if you're like a month late, it's not going to kill your chances of getting in medical school, especially if you believe like you can it'll like significantly improve your application. So just as a general rule of thumb, we tend to say submit it as soon as possible because like it'll never feel perfect and it'll never feel like it's good enough. It'll never feel like it's the best application you can, but if you feel like it's good enough and that like really anything you add to it is just like small incremental improvements, then just submit it as soon as possible. But again, I think the general rule of thumb is like as long as your application gets sent to school a little bit before Labor Day, you're kind of okay, kind of skirting it on the edge a little bit. But if it can significantly improve your application, don't feel like you need to like send out an incomplete application. But applications, you should like be aware that they do get reviewed in the order that they're received in. For most schools, some of them like wait until a specific date before they start reviewing, but that's like a very rare scenario. And it's also important to know that you can apply without an MCAT score. So you can, especially with COVID, a lot of schools will start looking at your application even if you don't have an MCAT yet. So don't let that hold you back from applying early. Don't think like everything else is done, but I don't have an MCAT, so I can't submit. Go ahead and just submit it. And then when you're submitting, if you don't have your school list like completely set yet when you're like submitting it, totally fine when you're initially submitting it to the AMCAS to just have one school listed that you like know for sure that you want to apply to. That way you can just get into the approval process as soon as possible. You can add on schools later and like basically once your application becomes approved, as soon as you add in school, it instantly gets transmitted to the school if it's like after the transmission date. So nothing wrong at all with submitting your application with just one school listed at the time. If you just want to get it into the approval process as soon as possible. So if you like without an MCAT score, you can kind of consider that if you feel confident that your score is good enough that like you kind of came out and you're like, yeah, I aced it. I know. Well, I don't want to say aced it because not a lot of people feel that. But if you came out and you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure I did fairly well. I know I didn't bomb it. I know I'm not going to need to like retake or anything, that like I can submit this cycle. Go ahead and apply without an MCAT score. Again, if you feel like you kind of want to wait for your MCAT score, that's also totally fine. Just do be aware that applications get reviewed in order that they're received in. So try to be early. Know that like the approval process, which is separate from the actual transmission process, does take a little bit of time. And like I say good rule of thumb is like assume 4 weeks. The earlier you submit when there's less volume, the faster it'll get approved. And so this is kind of just an overview of what we've talked about during this talk. So the work and activity section, kind of what the competencies, which we talked about, what they fall into. So pre-professional thinking and then science competencies, which is really just two. And then kind of a breakdown of the work and activities entries as well as the most meaningful experiences. Okay, and with that, we have an exit survey as well. So we'd really appreciate it if you guys could complete our survey, and if you do, you'll be entered into a raffle for a free 12-month Sketchy MCAT subscription. So Sketchy is great. We also use it in med school to help study. So free 12-month subscription is super helpful. So please fill out this survey. We'll include this here, and if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat or just unmute and talk about here. Or if you guys want, we'll also be going into breakout rooms in a little bit if you guys want to like ask questions there. So yeah. So if you guys have any questions, there's only a handful of us, so I think we have about this much in a breakout room anyway. So if you guys have any questions, there are plenty of medical students here that'd be happy to answer your questions. So go ahead, and if you want to just unmute or type in the chat, you can go for it.
Hello, I actually do have a super quick question. Is there such thing as an early decision application for medical schools, like for colleges, where we can say that we're going to commit to a school with like a binding contract if we get into that school?
Yeah, I can give so I didn't apply to any. I know some schools do have early decision programs. I think they'll still go through the AMCAS. So if someone else wants to jump in if they have more details. But there are definitely, I'm not sure if every school has them. You have to like check with like, I'm assuming if you have early decision, you know, schools that you want to apply to, check with those, check those schools and see if they have those programs. But yes, there are schools that have early decision that you can apply to.
Thank you.
Sophie, I'll also add to that if the school does offer like an early decision, a lot of times they will not allow you to apply to any other schools while they're making that decision. So if you know that school X is the one that you want to go to and you would never in a million years go to any other school, then early decision might be for you. However, if you do the early decision